1. I'll do a standard review of something going over my likes and dislikes. 2. I'll pick one aspect of that thing to compare to Spider Man 2. And then 3. I'll rate it as better or worse than Spider Man 2. Spider Man 2. Knives Out was my favorite movie of 2019. It did so many things right. From the awesome cast to the excellent writing and plot structure to the cool Clue style presentation. Here's a quick summary in case it's been a while since you last watched. It follows the story of an investigation in what had appeared to be a clear cut suicide of a successful author, Harlan Thrombey. The protagonist, Marta, is his nurse and is shown through flashbacks to have accidentally killed Harlan by mixing up his medications. Harlan then makes it appear to be a suicide to keep Marta out of trouble. He gives her a list of instructions to make it seem as if it could not have been her. The local investigators believe it to be a definite suicide, but a private investigator, Benoit Blanc, has been paid anonymously to look into it. The flashback showing it appeared to be Marta was shown very early on in the movie. This would have been a twist saved till the end in most movies of this genre. If you're anything like me, a super smart and hot person, you might have thought it was intended to be a subversion of the genre, where the solution to the crime was solved early on and the rest of the movie was centered around the character trying to get away with it, which would make sense given how likable the character of Marta is. Or there is something more going on. One of my favorite parts of Knives Out is how they led me to believe the real killer, Ransom, didn't do it. Everyone had interactions with Harlan before his death that could give them a potential motive. Richard, his son-in-law, was caught cheating by Harlan, who threatened to tell his wife Linda if he didn't. Joni, his daughter-in-law, was caught double-dipping from what was supposed to be money Harlan was sending for her daughter's college tuition, and Harlan informed her he would no longer be helping her out financially. Walt, his son, worked for his father's publishing company. He was handed this job by his dad and had very few responsibilities. Believing this was failing to give him incentive to build something of his own, Harlan fired Walt from the position. And finally, Ransom, Richard and Linda's son, was directly cut out of the will, and Harlan told him to his face. Ransom later even said he could have killed him. I could really relate to that part because one time my mom was late making my chicky nuggies. He did nothing for himself and was seen by his family as a leech. This part was not revealed until the will reading, but we knew they had a fight the night before that. All of these family members are shown to be very selfish and fake to one another, giving the impression any one of them could have been capable of the crime. The interesting thing about all of these interactions is that they both give many in the family motives for murder and could potentially be the behavior of someone about to commit suicide who is tying up loose ends. Of course, we are shown that this is not the case pretty early on. When I began trying to decide who else may have had some involvement, I immediately ruled out Ransom. He was too obvious, the outlier. Then, when he had played a larger role in the story, starting at the will reading, he tells his entire family to eat shit. This was honestly so much fun to watch as we had spent the entire movie up to that point seeing just how unlikable this whole family was. Seeing Ransom be pitted against them actually endeared me to him. It was then revealed that Harlan had changed his will and left everything he had to Marta and nothing to his family. The family basically attacked her, and Ransom was the only one trying to help her. This made me further rule him out for the opposite reason I had before. On top of that, I really felt for him because I'm also very hot. The plot is incredibly tightly woven, unlike anything I've seen before. The only major plot hole I can think of is in the scene where Marta believes she gave Harlan 50 times the dose of morphine. She thinks he will die in the next 10 minutes, but he is still coherent and walking around. This would not be the case if he was given that huge a dose of opiates intravenously. He may not die right away, but the effects of it would take place long before he had the time to think of and explain the entire plan to Marta. She appears to be a knowledgeable nurse, so it's odd she would not have noticed this. And I know this to be true because I did some experimenting with drugs from 18 to 23 in case it came up in a movie, and then went to rehab as an experiment. Before the next section, I just want to say every performance in this movie was great, but there are some standouts. Daniel Craig was both compelling and hilarious as Benoit Blanc. It was a lot of fun to see Chris Evans play a complete dick after he was Captain America for like a decade, and Ana de Armas played one of the most likable protagonists I've seen in a long time. Also, the addition of her vomiting upon lying was a cool one. It seemed like it could only work against her, but ended up being a benefit if she could hide it. People would always assume she was being truthful. Okay, I'd like to compare the plots of these two movies, specifically their ability to avoid making their plots feel forced. Feeling forced is a common problem in Spider-Man 2's plot, in my opinion. The explanation for Doc Ock's arms is that he needed them to make the small sun thing he was working on, which makes some sense. But then he's like, and I know what you're all thinking, but don't worry, I added this chip to suppress all of the arm's evil thoughts, emotions, and motives that have the ability to take over my own brain. Just some stuff I added, as a treat. And everyone's like, we weren't thinking that. And the unnecessary doesn't stop there. He gave these very expensive tongs eyes, and they literally talk to him.
Steal it? No, I'm not a criminal.
On top of all that, if you pay close enough attention, the top left arm actually has a crush on the bottom right arm, and I just made that up, but the fact that some of you believed it says a lot about how weird the rest of this is. Also, the idea that Peter loses his powers because he doesn't believe in himself is super strange. Was the original spider bite some kind of placebo effect? Nothing established this as a possibility, and there's even a scene where he tries to jump across buildings and very clearly believes his powers are back, but still comes crashing back down. Now, you might think that I'm too harshly criticizing a movie that is based already on stuff that can't happen, and you'd be kind of correct. But here's the thing, worlds in fiction that we get really immersed in all have one thing in common. They are consistent with their own rules. Magic in Harry Potter isn't real, but it's established as the base of the world early on. It's the whole point of the books. And if a spell is used in an important chapter, it's typically foreshadowed in a previous chapter. That prevents the event from feeling forced. If we don't already know about the particular thing in a universe, then when it is used as a means to move the plot forward, it feels like the writer couldn't figure out how to resolve the scene and just made something up. This concept is a little different with Knives Out, given it isn't a fantasy world, but the execution is exactly the same. Oh, and J.K. Rowling? Shut the fuck up. I'm just gonna say it. J.K. Rowling is worse than Spider-Man 2. But back to the topic of avoiding a plot feeling forced. Some examples of this in Knives Out are: 1. When Ransom first shows up, he says,
Ransom. Call me Ransom. It's my middle name. Only the help calls me Hugh.
This doesn't feel forced at all based on what we've heard of him up to this point. We know he's kind of a douche. And this line is super important for later on in the movie when Fran tells Marta, "You did this." Marta interpreted it as "you did this" and played it into the final twist at the end. 2. In another scene, while Marta is climbing down the side of the house, the grandmother says,
Ransom, are you back again already?
This is important because it shows Ransom had been there previously, but it could be easily dismissed as the old woman being senile in the moment. 3. The fact that Benoit Blanc is hired by an unknown stranger is established very early on and is key to the plot when we find out it was actually Ransom. 4. The actual murder plan is even foreshadowed when Harlan wants to write down the swapping of the meds as a potential novel idea if the killer were to do it on purpose. Everything is foreshadowed. I thought there were some things that weren't, like where Linda knew to use a lighter to read her father's note, but then upon rewatching, she was sifting through lighter burn notes from her father in the beginning of the movie. These touches prevent anything from ever feeling shoehorned in. It feels like everything was meticulously planned and the writers never just went, fuck it, Harlan died because... This problem is that it's worse than Spider-Man 2 in the final scene with Octavius. This has been brought up in other videos, but I'd like to add to it. He creates a larger sun that becomes self-sustaining, so they can't just unplug it like last time. The solution is that Octavius drowns it in the river. He drowns it. The sun. In the river. I'd be willing to go along with something silly like this if it had been established earlier on. But it isn't, and it isn't how things work in real life, so it just feels shoehorned in. To be sure, I googled, can you put the sun out with water? And Google responded by unregistering me to vote, and then with this. No amount of water thrown on the sun would cause it to go out. Instead, any amount of water would cause the sun to burn even more. The burning of the sun is nuclear fusion, not chemical combustion, which is the whole point of why he made the sun.
My design for initiating and sustaining fusion.
So this is the most egregious example of the writers going, fuck it, because this is the ultimate resolution to the movie. Contrast this with the end of Knives Out, where Ransom tries to stab Marta. It turns out to be a fake knife, and this would have felt like a get-out-of-plot-hole-free card if earlier in the movie Harlan hadn't said the line,
"Playing life like a game without consequence. Until you can't tell the difference between a stage prop and a real knife."
For these reasons and more, I have to give Knives Out a rating of better than Spider-Man 2. Thanks for watching, guys. Like and subscribe. You know, it's interesting. They actually did a study on people that don't subscribe to my channel, and the researchers actually found that they don't like them. Yeah, they're insufferable. But I'm sure you'll subscribe. I'm sure you're not insufferable.